Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics with Sam and Anne, the podcast that gives you everything you need in under 20 minutes.
It's Thursday, February the 27th. My name is Tim Ross, and I'm Chief Political Correspondent of Politico in Europe, standing in for Anne, who's going to be back on Monday. With me is Sam Coates of Sky News, on the day some claim marks the most important meeting between a US President and a UK Prime Minister since Roosevelt hung out with Churchill in 1941.
Thank you, William Hague. Well, it's certainly the most important meeting for Keir Starmer, well, at least of this relaunch cycle. And I suppose maybe the second or third most important foreign leader meeting for Donald Trump this week. We'll come to all of that in the moment. But before everyone else loses their head, just to put it all in perspective, in the last few minutes, I've just been going through the US newspapers and websites. Take the Wall Street Journal. Keir Starmer's visit is not mentioned in the first 8 pages, which is the entire news section as far as I can tell, and Ukraine is only discussed in the context of the security guarantee that President Zelensky is going to fly to Washington on Friday to sign. Look at the New York Times. That does lead on a piece headlined "Indifference or Hostility. Trump's view of Europe allies raises alarm." But that's about the EU, and Starmer gets a cursory single mention. I even looked at your website, Tim, Politico in the US, and the Starmer visit does feature on the homepage, piece by Dan Bloom,
Hooray.
This podcast, as item 33, if you exclude the sidebar items.
Oof.
So this trip really isn't dominating the US conversation at the moment. Obviously, it'll be reported largely in retrospect, but just a little bit of sobering context before everyone loses their mind, I think, is important.
Yeah, it's one of those. The relationship is very, very special, isn't it, to us? I think in the UK, we find that a very special relationship. It's not quite clear whether the Americans have always agreed with that. Anyway, as this podcast revealed on Monday, it is a packed day on the domestic agenda. So while the cameras are rolling in Washington, there'll be a lot of stuff happening back home too. The question of the second full runway at Gatwick is going to be a big deal today, as well as a list of outside interests of ministers, other transparency releases from the Cabinet Office, and quite a bit on NHS data is coming out this morning as well, I believe, Sam.
So it seems like one of those take out the trash days. So for those on the trip, it's probably better to keep your eyes peeled rather than going for a long lunch, but we won't double check on your time. However, there is inescapably one big item on the agenda. The PM landed in Washington last night. He spent some time at the residence of Ambassador Peter Mandelson. They had a reception for him there, and then he went off to meet some businesses before going to bed. But the main action, of course, is today. Do you want to just explain, Tim, the sort of shape of the day from Keir Starmer's point of view?
Starmer's going to be meeting various people during the day. Obviously, the big event is with the White House when he hangs out with Donald Trump in the Oval Office a bit later on. Before that, he's going to be engaging with Congress people in various forms. And then the thing everyone's going to be waiting for really is the press conference after that, when we'll just have to read the body language and between the lines of whatever they say when it comes to that crucial question of support for Ukraine.
So I suppose the key thing today is a bit like President Macron on Monday. There are 2 public moments. One moment is what's known as a pool spray. That's where a handful of journalists get allowed into the Oval Office. It always comes across as a bit of a bun fight as journalists sort of shout questions at the President and the Prime Minister. The behind the scenes point of those things is it allows the appearance of a bit of transparency. You do get a glimpse of the two men, but that format very much puts the power of who they choose to ask the questions in the hands of the principals, which means it isn't quite the great moment of democratic interrogation that journalists would like. That actually waits until 7 o'clock when there's the sort of more formal press conference, when I think the bulk of the travelling UK media get to go in and watch that and ask a handful of questions. Those are the things that have ranged from massively awkward moments with Theresa May through to more sort of convivial affairs when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. So I think we'll be reading everything, as you say, from the body language to the extent to which Donald Trump says what Keir Starmer wants him to. I just remember that very first press conference with Theresa May where she sort of pulled a trick on Donald Trump, as it were. Clearly in the private meeting beforehand, she got him to say some things about NATO and the US commitment, ongoing commitment to NATO. And then in that press conference, Theresa May came out and she said, in our meeting, President Trump signed up to continuing to support NATO and basically got Donald Trump to nod along. And that was the most significant commitment to NATO that we'd had from Donald Trump since he was elected president the first time. So will Keir Starmer try that? Will he basically make statements that he wants Donald Trump to sign up to in public and just hope that the new president, the newly re-elected president, doesn't contradict him? That's certainly one technique that is deployed. Tim, you watched the Macron press conference on Monday. Do you think that the French president got as much out of Donald Trump as he would have wanted then?
Honestly, I'm not sure that he necessarily did, although, what will be really fascinating to all of us watching will be the extent to which Starmer tries to redeploy a sense of charming and sweet talking and flattery in the way that Macron managed. It was all very Gallic and sort of a big attempt to sort of charm the president. Called him Dear Donald. They reminisced about a dinner they'd had at the Eiffel Tower. I'm not sure that Starmer's kind of slightly buttoned up geography teacher approach is necessarily going to lend itself to that kind of style. And when it comes to the nuts and bolts of what he got, I mean, Macron afterwards was asked about this, and he was trying to put a brave face on it, saying he did think Trump understood the point that Putin was the aggressor, that he did think that Trump would sign up to some sort of security guarantee, but actually there was nothing concrete there at all. And the real issue is that ever since that meeting on Monday, the US and Trump in particular have been sort of making these statements that he's not going to guarantee very much when it comes to Ukraine's security in the long term. And that's obviously absolutely vital to everything Starmer's trying to do out there right now.
Now, on the plane on the way out, about an hour in, the Prime Minister usually gives it's like a mini press conference. It's called a huddle. And you get the words on the record, but you don't get any images or videos of that. And that took place as normal on the way to Washington. As Keir Starmer was gearing up to answer questions from the sort of assembled throng of lobby hacks, he did actually say, I'm going to have to be less candid than normal to the waiting journalists, and it was almost meant as a joke. But reading through all the different comments that he made, I fear that the Prime Minister was on the money with that one. There are one or two clues, because one of the things that goes on in these huddles is the Prime Minister comes having just read all his briefing papers for the meeting with, for instance, in this case, Donald Trump, and so there will be arguments that he is going to make to the president freshly in the mind of the Prime Minister. And to me, one thing stood out from the remarks on the plane in the huddle, which is he started to talk about how the Salisbury incident shows how Russia is a direct threat to UK security. You remember the poisoning in Salisbury a few years back when Theresa May was Prime Minister by two Russian agents. That is the kind of argument, drawing a direct link between Russia's threat to the UK and the current situation in Ukraine appears to be something that he's going to try out as an argument to Donald Trump in order to try and convince him as part of this greater argument that it would look weak, not strong, for the US to continue to stand up to Donald Trump. The sort of headline message from the huddle, the sort of the bit that everybody's talking about this morning, was a question: can you trust Donald Trump given what you've seen in the last few weeks? And Starmer said, yes, I've got a good relationship with him, and then talked about the various sort of dinners and calls that he's had. So the British pose going into all of this, which is very different from the German one, very different from previous Australian prime ministers, is to be more supplicant than any kind of challenger to President Trump. But that needs to deliver results. That needs to deliver results by the end of the day, and Starmer needs to come away not looking like he's been embarrassed. Tim, at the moment, the item that they say is top of the agenda is Ukraine. How much progress do you think that Keir Starmer can actually make?
I'm slightly pessimistic, just because I think the way Trump operates is that he has one priority at all times, and that's pretty much himself and America and what America really wants. I've not seen a huge amount of love bombing coming the other way. I mean, number 10, as you know, are always desperately trying to talk up the relationship. They say they have a very good personal rapport, and that's not always the case. I think the point about Salisbury, though, is a really interesting one, Sam, just because actually, thinking back on it, the US, first of all, obviously back, that was 2018, I think, wasn't it? But Theresa May managed to get a bunch of European countries to kick out diplomats from Russia, spies, whatever. And then Donald Trump joined in and threw loads out. I mean, like many more than the others. And it was a really dramatic move. So on that security level, I think that's a button that is definitely worth pressing from the UK's perspective, the Salisbury button, to see whether actually that jogs Trump into really remembering just what a sort of a threat Putin actually is. But you mentioned the question of trust. Now, Starmer said, I think, in that plain huddle that he does trust Donald Trump. But then we've got Donald Trump basically saying he does trust Vladimir Putin. So that's a bit of a logical issue for Downing Street, which they'll have to try to unravel at some point. And then just to come back to the question of what those security guarantees look like, if Keir Starmer does not get anything really robust out of the White House visit when it comes to what America is or isn't prepared to do, is he still going to send British troops out there? Would he put them at risk?
So yesterday, there was more evidence that the sort of Downing Street playbook is going to have to be updated all the time ahead of the meeting this afternoon. Trump had the first sort of public cabinet meeting with figures ranging from Elon Musk to his national security team. He was asked then about this concept of a security backstop that he might provide to Ukraine, because it cropped up at Macron's meeting. It's cropping up in the deal with President Zelensky over minerals. And he said this. He said, "I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that." Now, that is flatly the opposite of what Keir Starmer will want Donald Trump to be saying today. What officials say to me privately is, look, the US have ruled out sending troops to Ukraine. That's absolutely fair enough, but there just might be some wiggle room when it comes to maybe arming and equipping, or air cover, or air defences, all of the kind of aid that President Zelensky is still hoping to preserve heading from the US to Ukraine. And that's the kind of thing we mean by a security guarantee. But the type of security guarantee will entirely determine, as you say, the type of force that the UK and France can deploy, because there are enormous limits on what can happen in Ukraine with British troops, because they can't engage on the front line, and they can't do very much unless they are protected by US troops, and it is all very perilous. So Keir Starmer's in the huddle on the plane out, it's almost sounded like he's made a decision on troops, but privately I'm told there could be all sorts of options in terms of what this looks like. And if there is no security guarantee at all, whether or not any of this can go ahead, it's interesting to watch Europe disunited on this. Italy coming out very firmly yesterday, saying that they've got no intention of sending peacekeeping troops on this mission unless it's a UN badged affair, which doesn't look very likely. And they basically say, look, we don't think that this is the right thing to do, and we've got no intention of taking part. So shaky to say the least. But I do wonder, Tim, do you think that Ukraine really is the top priority for Keir Starmer, even though we say it is? Or isn't there an argument to say the biggest domestic priority for Keir Starmer on this visit is actually trying to avert the option of the US president imposing tariffs on the UK. If any of those tariffs get levied, as has been threatened in a sort of reciprocal act, because we levy VAT on goods, which Trump seems to regard as some kind of tariff in itself, he's threatened the UK by implication with some form of tariffs. Isn't the bigger win or loss actually on tariffs, given that we're only a bit part player in the Ukraine argument?
I mean, I think so, although I slightly question that point about being a bit part player, because I think actually the way that it seems to be working at the moment is America is very hands-off on Ukraine when it comes to the future of security, and Britain and France are the two leading countries that are really stepping up in the biggest possible way, certainly on troop contributions. And actually, you just reminded me of Starmer's style when he said his mind seemed like it was made up on troops. When I was in Ukraine with him in Kyiv a month ago, and we had this interview, and he was sort of sitting down in a restaurant with a log fire burning in the corner, chewing the fat on Ukraine. It seemed to me his mind was made up then. So I feel like actually he's been clear for a very long time that Britain was going to have to send troops over there. But also in that chat that we had, he was he was on the trade issue with the US. He was pretty keen to make sure that actual trade talks on a deal started within weeks. That's what he said. He wanted the proper trade deal talks to start within weeks. Instead, what we've got is this onslaught from Donald Trump, whacking tariffs on everybody left, right, and centre, and suggesting they might be able to sort it out with the UK, but actually we don't have any assurances in writing on that one. And it would be a hugely bad look, a real sort of diplomatic fail if Starmer comes back and in short order Trump then hits the UK with tariffs of some kind. So you're right, there's a massive trap there for him potentially that he needs to swerve.
At that cabinet meeting yesterday, Donald Trump put a number on the level of tariff that he might impose on EU countries. He put that at 25%. So we now have a kind of ballpark figure for just how much America may end up costing the UK as well, if Donald Trump lumps the UK into the trade war that he looks like he's going to have with the rest of the EU. The Prime Minister making the argument on the plane, look, we've got a pretty healthy trade surplus with America, so there's no need to do that. Let's see whether he wins. We'll be able to mark the Prime Minister's homework later today. European leaders will be able to mark the Prime Minister's success or otherwise on Sunday. Lancaster House summit on Sunday looks like it's shaping up to be quite a big event. President Macron said overnight that he would be coming to the UK on Sunday to take part on that. A slew of other leaders look like they're heading to meet Keir Starmer in central London there as well. It is interesting that one of the byproducts of the last 2 weeks of intensive Trump coping diplomacy has been to sort of catapult Britain much more to the heart of the European conversation because of Ukraine and because of the changing pose of the new American administration. Do you think Sunday marks a significant moment?
I really do. I think it's fascinating, as you say. Just like, I mean, we left the EU. Relations have been pretty shaky ever since, and Starmer has spent huge amounts of time talking to European leaders ever since he got in. And this is the sort of leadership role on defence that I think he instinctively wants to play, but kind of can't really do it really on the rest of the European Union relationship. But on defence, there's a very good and clear case for Britain's leadership role. The new German Chancellor, the guy we're expecting to become the new German Chancellor once their talks are done on forming a coalition government, Friedrich Merz, actually said a week ago that he wanted Britain to provide its nuclear umbrella to the whole of Europe in a way that he thinks that we don't at the moment. Obviously, through NATO, there is that guarantee, but he's envisaging a completely new security structure in which Britain and France actually take on the role that NATO's had, really, and provide that sort of security umbrella through their nuclear weapons to Germany and to other countries. And I think the UK is basically really quite interested in that concept to see, with Merz, what more that we can do. So, Sunday's going to be a big moment, and I think Zelensky will probably make an appearance in some form as well. And at that point, we'll have had lots of outreach to the White House from the French and the British. The minerals deal will probably have been signed. Zelensky will have been over there as well, talking to Trump. And it will be a real moment to take stock of just what happens now in Ukraine when it comes to the peace deal. Is this deal viable? And is Putin going to respect it? Will be the two kind of really crucial questions that people will want to answer by Sunday.
No pressure, Keir. Domestically, one thing to look out for is whether or not the government approve a full second runway at Gatwick. I say full second runway because there are two runways at Gatwick, but one's broadly an emergency runway, although it is used quite a lot. Heidi Alexander due to make the decision. I kind of think it's going to go ahead, but that isn't the question that those involved are looking out to answer. The question is just how many environmental obligations are put on Gatwick as a condition of doing this. In particular, I think those involved are worried that they may stipulate, the government may stipulate the sheer sort of numbers, the percentage of people going to Gatwick that have to come by public transport rather than by car in order to reduce the emissions that Gatwick create in future. But of course, anybody who's travelled to Gatwick Airport on the rickety line that also goes to Brighton will know that it's not entirely down to Gatwick Airport itself how good its public transport connections are. And so there are fears that the government might approve this runway, but actually it's economically unviable because of unrealistic conditions that are put on making it work. Lots of things on the runway. We're going to see what flies and what doesn't. We've hit the 20-minute mark. Very good. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Tim. We will be back with this podcast on Monday. We'll see you then.
Bye. Thanks, Sam.
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel,
And I'm Yelda Hakim.
and we're the top international correspondents at NBC News and Sky News, and we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yelda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.